Okay, I think we will now start the session while people are still joining us. It's now 4 p.m. EST, so just want to be mindful of the timing. So thank you very much, everyone. Welcome. My name is Yashin Brijmohan. I'll be moderating the session today with Janavi Dirisina who's also available for you to chat on. You are able to use your chat function today. We will allow you to unmute and use the video functions later on in the conversation. I would just like to introduce some of the protocols for today's meeting. Feel free to use the chat. The welcome address will be done by the chair of our division, which is Daniel, and I'll now introduce him. So Daniel, if you can do the welcome, as well as introduce our guest speaker today, that would be great. So Daniel, over to you.
Hello, everyone. We want to welcome you to this webinar at this time, organized by the American Society for Engineering Education Student Division. And permits me at this point in time to introduce to you our speaker for today's session. Professor Matthew Ohland has a PhD in civil engineering with a graduate minor in education from the University of Florida in 1996. Previously, he earned an MS in materials engineering in 1992 and an MS in mechanical engineering in 1991, and a BS in engineering and a BA in religion. His research on the longitudinal study of engineering student development, peer evaluation, and extending the use of active and cooperative learning methods has been supported by over $11.6 million from the National Science Foundation. Dr. Ohland is a member of the American Society for Engineering Education, a member of Board of Governors of the Education Society of IEEE, and a program evaluator for ABET for general programs. Dr. Ohland's research team has been recognized for its work on longitudinal studies of engineering students with Best Paper Awards in multiple journals and conferences, the Premier Award for Excellence in Engineering Education courseware, and it has been recognized by both Purdue University and Clemson University with teaching awards. Join me to welcome Dr. Ohland Matthew to today's section. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Ohland.
Thanks so much. I'll go ahead and share my slides now.
All clear from our end. Thank you.
Yep. And I'm just trying to also, let's see, there we go. All right. Every time you share your screen, it rearranges some things. So I got tapped to talk about theory usage in engineering education research, which is it's fascinating. I would have thought of a number of other folks who would be better choices for this particular talk. But I'm honored to be asked. So let's go ahead and give it a try. So I'll start by saying I think really theory and theoretical frameworks really enter into our research in three different distinct ways, right? So one is understanding what is already known about a topic. So as you look at the literature, you're likely to discover various people's thinking about theories that are relevant to your work. But then as you move forward and think about what your own contribution is, right, and in many cases, some research is actually intended to be theory generating. So part of that process, and I think the question sort of ends up being framed slightly differently for quantitative and qualitative work. In quantitative work, it tends to be, you have some kind of hypothesis. So the theoretical framework question is sort of what is your chain of logic for that hypothesis, right? Why do you think that your hypothesis is in fact true, right? What is your argument for for imagining that that's the case? And in qualitative research, I think it tends to be more the case. What is the theoretical basis for asking the questions that you're asking? or in fact, is there no theoretical basis, in which case, right, it's grounded theory work, where your entire focus is on developing the theory, where you think that there is no theory that does what you want it to do at that point. But then a lot of my students are surprised to discover that that new conversations about theory come in when you have results in hand. When you discover something and you're trying to explain what is happening, you end up needing to refer to different theories than you had already been considering in order to explain what you see is happening. So let me, what I'm essentially doing is, I've got a number of case studies, and the first one, I'm going to ask you a question. And folks can enter things in the chat. So early in my career, there is this paper where I noticed that I was teaching a class that had a prerequisite of calculus. And so I started to write assignments that included an expectation that students had an understanding of calculus. And the other faculty said, no, you don't want to do that, because we want to keep this simple, and keep the applications, keep the calculus out of it. So, but calculus is a prerequisite, so why wouldn't we depend on it? And so since they weren't depending on calculus, I suggested that we remove the prerequisite, because if it didn't need to be there, and what happened was, when we removed the prerequisite, it actually simplified the timeline that students could take that course, and it actually had an immediate improvement in retention. And so I wrote up the results. I showed what the change was. I showed what the improvement in retention was, and submitted a paper to the Journal of Engineering Education. And it was, the feedback we got was sort of like major revision material, which was like, where's the literature review? Where's your theoretical framework? And so my question at the time was sort of isn't it enough to be right? Like, I saw this opportunity, we made a change, and it had this positive effect. So, right, so my question to you then is, why is it important then that I had to go back and sort of establish a literature review and a theoretical framework in order to publish that work? So I'm watching for people's thoughts in the chat. I'm not seeing any.
I don't know whether it's a Friday afternoon, but the colleagues on the other end, if you can use the chat function, we would like to hear from all of you. When a question is asked, that would be great if you can respond.
Okay, great. Oh, ASEE Ching is connected. So, right, to convince others to apply this in different contexts. Good. So similarly, Jack, to make things more generalizable, to make it more applicable. Some great answers coming through. So people were just typing, right? To frame your question, yeah, right. To contextualize the study, and right. And so I think we've covered the big issues, right? So part of the lit review is necessary just to show, right, that that I'm not trying to take credit for something that someone else has already published, but then also to set it in context, right? So, for example, if other people have done similar work, then my case would help build a stronger case for it being more generalizable and so forth. So there's a number of reasons why the literature review is important. And then when it comes to the theoretical framework, part of that argument is, if you don't know why a thing is working, if you don't have a sort of a theoretical framework for why what you're seeing is what you're seeing, then it's harder to convince someone that it's because of the change that you made, right? So in other words, if I don't have an explanation for why that curriculum change would have that effect, it could have been some other effect and that I'm not accounting for. And so let me jump to questions about theoretical roots. So there are 3 different papers here that depend on different theoretical backgrounds, where I think that there's a really interesting conversation to have around where is the theoretical basis for these things. So is anyone familiar with Tinto has done this theoretical work on academic and social integration. I think Xi-Ching has probably heard me talk about this before, but are other folks aware of sort of where Tinto's work is based theoretically? If anyone does know, it's a short answer. Oh, awesome. Awesome. Thanks, Nivi. It's great to know I'm getting collective questions from FIU. That's awesome. So that's a short answer one. Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Nivi. Someone in the crowd at FIU knew that. So it's right. It's based on Durkheim's theories about suicide, and so like that really makes you think about, right, what are the assumptions that go into having a theory of retention and academic and social integration that's based on essentially making the analogy that dropping out of school is essentially academic suicide, especially when that doesn't account for the fact that if someone could drop out of school here at Purdue and they could end up at Florida International, and clearly that's not at all equivalent to academic suicide, but we just don't know what happened to the student because they left our university. And so there's some really interesting conversation there. And then survival analysis comes right from a lot of that work comes out of the medical community, where it's an event-based analysis, but the event is typically death, and so hence the term survival analysis. And so I had this conversation for a long time with the people in my research team. I was uncomfortable using survival analysis because on the one hand, if you're doing, say, a cancer study and you're looking at survival analysis as a method, the theoretical underpinnings are based on the fact that, like, at some point everybody dies, and so everyone will experience that event when it comes to event-based analysis. So what you're doing is you're trying to understand whether certain people experience the event on a longer time scale, but you're guaranteed that ultimately everyone will experience the event. That is not true with any of the events that we can track in the academic context, right? Not everyone is guaranteed to graduate. Not everyone is guaranteed to drop out. Not everyone is guaranteed to experience any of the particular outcomes that you can define within the context of an educational study. And so there's something about that doesn't seem to fit. And yet this technique is used because of the benefits of doing event-based analyses. But there's still something in that really gnaws at me, that something about that theory doesn't actually fit. And then the third paper I wanted to talk about in that context of thinking about those theoretical roots is this paper we wrote on Beyond Pipeline and Pathways, looking at ecosystem metrics with student data analyses. And we had some really big discussions that were very much sort of the in the theoretical framework space with that paper. One of them was around, we ended up in that paper focusing on students who were switching among engineering majors. And as we talked about that as being sort of a migration phenomenon, there's a huge literature on immigration, on migration theory related to human beings and the choices they make to migrate from one place to another. And as we thought about applying those theoretical frameworks in the context of our work, the timing was bad, which is to say there was a lot of negative national discourse in the United States around immigrants. And so we didn't want our work to get tied up in that, nor did we want to make it look like we were trying to relate to that conversation by using those methods. So we ended up not taking advantage of a very large body of literature and theory just because of political forces. So then as we started to look more into ecosystem frameworks, we had some absolutely fascinating discussions about ways that we could apply that in the academic context. So the concepts like sentinel species, which in biology are species that are more sensitive to changes in an ecosystem, and therefore end up signaling when something is wrong with a system because they're the ones that experience it first or most severely. And we definitely do have in our systems what we would possibly consider to be sentinel species. In the same way, when you talk about ecosystems, you frequently talk about predators and prey. And so we had these conversations about, like, do we want to go there, right? Do we want to talk about certain classes or professors or disciplines, right, that have predatory behavior? And we decided not to go there. But we had some fascinating discussions about the possibility of thinking of it in that way. The point being, whenever you engage a particular theoretical framework, right, I think there is an important opportunity to think sort of about all of the richness of that theoretical tradition and what it implies for using that particular one. And I think that addresses one of the questions that I got in advance, which was sort of the, how do you make sure that you're picking, when you have multiple theoretical frameworks to pick from, how do you know you're picking the right one? I mean, and the answer is you don't, right? But ultimately, you make that decision on the basis of evidence, right? Which one has the strongest support in the literature for that aligns with what you're doing, and essentially which one feels like it fits best for you and your research. Because clearly we left a lot on the table for what we could have done with ecosystems simply because of those choices that we made. So let me tell you now. Let me now switch to this. The importance of letting theory override methods. So the example I'll give you here is in the early development of the CATME instrument, which is a 5-factor behaviorally anchored instrument for measuring team member effectiveness. So not team effectiveness, but individual team member effectiveness. And the exploratory factor analysis, the results, it indicated that a 3-factor model was a better fit than a 1-factor model, which is good. So it meant that rather than just measuring one overall, is someone an effective team member, that there were 3 different ways that people could be effective team members. But there was also a 5-factor model that it didn't fit quite as well. And so those additional 2 factors were things that were theoretically important. And the 2 factors, if you're familiar with the CATME system, the 2 factors that were sort of on the table for being omitted would have been what we call keeping the team on track, which is monitoring a team's progress toward its goals, and then giving feedback related to that. And the second one that would have been taken out would have been what we call expecting quality. So voicing the fact that the team is capable of doing a good job and enforcing that behavior. So being willing to say to the team, like, this work is not up to our standards. And so those 2 could have been eliminated, and technically the fit as an instrument was better, but theory in this case, we chose to stick with the theory, which was theory would indicate these other 2 things are important. And so we treated it as more our opportunity was to keep those in the instrument and to plan to teach people about the importance of those criteria, of those ways of being a good team member, rather than to scrap them and say, because empirically these didn't look like they were important, we threw them away. So theory is allowed to drive your methods in that sense. So I also want to talk about, and again, I'm trying to generate as much opportunity for questions as possible. So there are disciplinary differences in the role of theory. So this case is a paper where we identified a paper in a prominent journal. I believe it was the Journal of Applied Psychology, which is a huge, very prominent journal in that field. And there was a purely theoretical paper that had this rhetoric about literally someone with no data arguing that certain patterns should potentially occur when people are doing round robin rating of their peers. But it was completely, it was just rhetoric. It was all theoretical, right? Just they made a case for why these different patterns should exist, but they had no data to say that they did. And we did. We had the data. And so we went into the data that was already in the CAMI system. And in fact, we confirmed all of the patterns that they predicted would exist, it did exist. And we found a new pattern that they hadn't anticipated. And we went to the journal and said, like, look, we have empirical data that is supportive of and expansive of the theory that was published in this other paper in your journal. And they said, that is not a novel contribution. I mean, and we said, like, oh dear God, like, do you? I mean, so apparently, and this is true in the management field, and the psychology field, the ability to argue your case is more important than having actual empirical data that actually supports your case. And so there's this weird devaluing of empirical data with a preference for just rhetoric. So in their case, like arguing about like the theoretical sense is apparently preferred to the exclusion of being able to actually put any data behind that. It was really strange. But that's apparently consistent through the management community. So I thought I had one more. I thought I had one more case, but it looks like I don't think I'm working from a different position. So let me talk about the questions that got sent ahead of time. Right, I talked about when you're looking for the most suitable theory about considering evidence and fit. I think those are the two important things when you're trying to think about choosing among a set of relevant theories. And then there was another question about, does theory also encompass theoretical framework? So the difference between those two terms is that a framework can include multiple theories. So one of my students now, Hayam Osman, is working where she actually needs multiple theories to account for the different things that she's working in. So she's got sort of a general theoretical framework, which is I think grounded in Tinto's work in particular, but where multiple other theories get involved in order to explain it. And Xi-Ching has done similar things, and other students as well, where there's no one theory that sort of describes all of the parts of their work. And so, in order to really encapsulate it, you end up pulling, from one theoretical basis and another theoretical basis. And part of the framework part of it is talking about how those different theories interact in a larger sense to answer the question that you're trying to answer. And I'm sure whoever asked the question, the next question, right, is the right, what strategies ensure that the chosen theories align with your results? And the answer is none. Right, you do your best to think about what theories and theoretical frameworks are appropriate. But when you see the results, I think it's entirely normal to have to bring more theory in when you get to the part where you're trying to interpret what you're seeing, and that's totally fine. And it's, you don't need to sort of go back and introduce that theory into your literature review as if you thought of it ahead of time. It's perfectly fine to introduce new theoretical frameworks and theories into your discussion section. Totally fine. And I think the cases sort of answer that last question. Right. So how does the effective integration of theoretical concepts enhance the quality right of research? I think it's in those three ways that I mentioned up at the front, right? They establish the basis for your line of questioning. They establish the prior work that's been done to understand that line of questioning. And then in the third case, right, they help you interpret your findings after you actually have results. Whether you're in a quantitative or qualitative space, it's in both cases, it's quite common to need to introduce more to new theoretical pieces as you try to interpret what you're seeing. That conversation usually goes something like, "Why is this happening? Oh, that sounds like in this particular theoretical framework, when someone is trying to explain something else, that maybe helps explain what we're seeing here." And then suddenly you're talking about, right, adding some little new theoretical piece to what you're doing. And again, that happens all the time, and it's totally fine. So I wanted to leave lots of time for questions. I know I talked a little bit on the fast side. I see Haleh throw in a wow, but I'm not sure what the wow is about because I didn't see when it showed up there.
It was
But yeah,
about
so let's. I'd love to hear what other questions there are, and I'll do my best.
I've just allowed for the unmute function or start video. So if you want to also unmute, you're welcome to do that now. I'm getting some questions on my end. If you don't mind me just raising them in the meantime, Dr. Ohland.
Oh, sure,
okay?
Sure.
Yeah. One question is, what is considered a theory, and when is a theory or a model or framework?
I mean, I tend to think of a theory as sort of a chain of logic. So if we predict that there is a relationship, or that if we predict that doing a certain activity will make students feel, say, more psychologically safe, say, in teams. So what the theory needs to say is, okay, so right, what do we know about what causes students to feel psychologically safe, and what about this activity promotes that, those things that we know that are related to it, and if you were in more of the theory generation space, the question would shift more to, like, why do we think that this new thing would be related to psychological safety? And so that case ends up being made either by referencing other theories that are connected to things that seem to be related, or if psychological safety has been shown to be related to one thing, and then that other thing has been shown to be related to the thing that you're working with, right? Your theory might be that, in fact, it's more of a direct relationship than a moderated relationship, and so you're trying to find out if, in fact, you can have a more direct influence on psychological safety by focusing on what you're interested in, right? So that ends up being more theory generating than focusing on other people's theories.
Dr. Ohland, Nivi asks if you can speak more to theory and methods.
Sure. So some examples would be, like the case that I talked about when we think about, for example, survival analysis, right? Like I really we had and some of it is included in the paper as well, but I think the conversation happened a lot more before publication, which was, is it appropriate to use this method when it relies on a theoretical foundation that is, that presumes an event-based analysis where everyone experiences the event. And I see Hala asking about theories that can be used in a study focused on midfield data. Okay, there tend to be, and this references earlier questions about right, when there are multiple theories, how do you pick? So there tend to be sometimes theories end up being grouped together, and the ones that tend to be relevant to doing research with student records data are what are referred to as college impact theories. So Tinto's work would fall into that. Pace would fall into that. Alexander Aston would absolutely fall into that. And so we've used different frameworks over time. And so let me actually, I think I'll reshare, right? I think I stopped sharing. Window. Oh, am I still sharing?
Yes, you are.
Oh, it looks like I'm still sharing. Yeah, okay. So oh, maybe that's the slide I'm missing. Hold on. Oh no. Okay, so the top piece of work there is based on Tinto's work on academic social integration, specifically because we were looking at having a particular measure of academic integration, which is when students appear to register in classes together at a rate higher than would be predicted by random chance. So we actually had one institution, it turns out to be Purdue, where a computer assigned students to classes based on just what they wanted to enroll in for multiple years. And so that gave us a baseline for what is the random chance that students end up in the same section. And then we could then ask at Purdue and other places, when students have choice, right, how often are they choosing to enroll in a class with a particular person, and therefore treating that as an indication that they're intentionally walking the academic path together. And so that particular college impact model fit really well because of its focus on academic integration, and that we thought we had a metric that would address it, and we did. On the other hand, some earlier work and some later work using midfield is much more focused on Aston's work, which is based on a model which is, it considers inputs like who is the student and what kind of education did they have and how many credits did they bring in and all that kind of thing. And then there are outcomes, and outcomes can be a bunch of different outcomes in the midfield context. It can be the major they choose, the GPA that they earn, the GPA that they get overall. Do they graduate? How long does it take them to graduate, right? So there's a bunch of different outcomes you can focus on. And then the third part of the Aston triangle is basically what the institution does. So it's inputs, and outcomes, and in the middle is this environment. And the environment is everything. It's everything that the institution does to and for that student. Right, and it leaves us really wide open for, right, the different things we can consider as being the elements of the environment that we're focused on. Now, other people have like David Knight from Virginia Tech and other folks have taken that kind of Aston work, and they've sort of blown up that environment piece to talk more specifically about what are the different components in that, and how, and we can think about how to measure them. So we also talk about that as a framework in the college impact model space. So again, it's a whole class of theories, but we choose from the class of theories, usually based on the specific study that we're working on at the time.
Thank you. The next question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you utilize a theory for a different race or different ethnicity that was not originally meant for?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I mean, there are absolutely quite a few theories that have been developed using empirical data that was biased in various ways, by age, by ethnicity, by gender. So, like, I mean, there's work in in ethics by Kohlberg that's routinely criticized for being, having been focused on male students of a very particular age, and mostly white. And so, like, that's like 3 different demographic restrictions on whether that particular theory is applicable. So I think it opens up sort of 2 questions, right? One is, there's an opportunity there for people who are doing work in that area based on that framework, but then have the opportunity to, in their own work, to analyze the extent to which that theory is actually working for other students, right? Other students than those for whom that work was done. But you have to do that consciously, making sure that the instrument itself is not, changing the results, right? So one of the things that we've started doing with midfield data, when we talk about predicting student pathways and outcomes, is instead of generating a model and looking to see how that model fits for different populations of students, instead we can develop a different model for different populations of students, and then compare, like, how are those models different, and that's really looking at it a very different way, right? And so instead of saying this is sort of the model that fits for all students generally, and then trying to figure out if that model is working for a particular group of students, what we're saying is, actually, no, I'm thinking that, this group of students might actually, like, so, in this group of students might have different priorities, different reactions, different goals, and so they get a different model that it just predicts for them on a completely different basis. And again, that ends up being more in this space of theory generating, right, where you have to ask yourself, oh, well, okay, so if this system behaves differently for different groups of students, then you're moving in the direction of having different theories apply to different groups of folks, and so that, I mean, to put that in a theoretical context, right? On the one hand, right, a theory of that might use some branch of critical theory right, which would acknowledge that some people are intentionally oppressed or left out of a particular system, and that has some effect on their ability to succeed in that system, right, it might not make sense to apply that particular theoretical framework when you're looking at the dominant group. And so, right, because the system was designed for the dominant group. And so it does make sense that you might consider different theoretical frameworks for different populations within a study. It's entirely possible that in your particular, in any of your particular line of work, you may not really have an option for finding a theory that's more inclusive of various populations. And so you may always have some element of your work which is is either theory generating, where you're generating new theory related to populations not served by the original work, or you're stuck with the limitation, right, of saying, look, I'm basing it on this theory, but this theory was developed for a population that doesn't match my population in various ways, and therefore part of the result is sort of suspect. And I think that conversation is taken up well in an editorial by Alice Pauley in Journal of Engineering Education, where she I think her basic argument was, okay, either account for what's happening to populations that don't fit the frameworks that you're using, or acknowledge that they don't, right? Either get the data that you need to make a claim about what's happening to those populations, or if you don't have the data, then don't claim that your results apply to that population.
When someone is new to engineering education research, where or how can they search for potential theory to guide their work?
Oh, so I have one of my favorite books, and I need to make sure I get the right title.
Dr. Ohland, if you don't mind, if you could maybe drop your slide, then at least you'll come onto the screen a bit better. Thank you.
Yeah, great idea. Oh, I gotta find, hold on, let me get the book. I'm sure I'll find it. There it is. I'll just drop a link to it. One of my favorites in that space is called Learning and Motivation in the Post-Secondary Classroom. And so it's by Marilla Stanicki. She covers a wide variety of theories in the learning and motivation space. So that's a super great resource for that.
Perfect, thank you. And how I ask this question, do you suggest any strategies on how to refine the best fit theory when multiple exist?
Really, in my work, the focus has always been sort of just which. Well, the first filter is sort of the I go with like almost the gut check, right? Like, you look at how that theory is being used in the literature. Is it being, when it's used in the literature, does it seem to be reasonable? Do other researchers seem to believe that this theory has a solid basis, right? And so some of that is just based on sort of citations, right? Some of that is based on the way that people talk about that theory in the literature. And some of that is based on your own sort of gut check, like, does this sound like something that you believe in? Because ultimately, if you don't believe in it, right? If you think there's something fundamentally wrong about a theory, don't stick with it, right? Use a different one. Because there are definitely contexts where I don't feel comfortable using Tinto's work, because if I'm really looking at, for example, some of the analyses we do with midfield is much more focused on institutional structures. And unless I'm talking about how those institutional structures affect either academic integration or social integration, then that work doesn't really fit what Tinto is talking about. Then that wouldn't be the right framework to use. So I saw Siqing referring to, yeah, so some other theories, right? Bandura's social identity theory, and then there's resources reservation theory. Yeah, and in the book by Svinicki, right? I mean, there are different motivation theories too, right? And they get at different things, right? So like for pedagogy, I generally favor self-determination theory, because it's real easy for me as an instructor to create experiences that attach to one of the three main parts of self-determination theory: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. But if I'm doing research, especially if I'm doing qualitative research, I would really lean much more heavily on like the expectancy value theory. Like what are the students' values and what do they expect out of this experience? And that's something that students can really speak to in a qualitative sense. So right, so what you're doing with the theory makes a difference here, right? If you're trying to use the theory to, if you're trying to generate recommendations for pedagogy, right, that's one thing. If you're trying to do fundamental research in how some particular thing operates, right? What are the mechanisms by which someone is motivated in a particular context? That's different, I think.
Do you mind if I ask you a quick question, Dr. Ohland?
Sure, go ahead.
So do you mean that if we choose quantitative method, it can be different versus if we do qual or maybe mix?
I definitely do think that some theoretical frameworks fit better for quantitative work, but I think the bigger difference is sort of how you apply that theory, I think, changes. So like I got to at the beginning, right, where in quantitative work, right, you're making a hypothesis and then you're trying to test that hypothesis. So in that context, you need a theory to explain, like, why do you have that hypothesis? Like, why do you think that thing will happen? And so you're trying to find a theory that makes that connection. But when you're doing quantitative work, right, you don't have a hypothesis. It doesn't work that way, right? So you're exploring a phenomenon. Now, at some point, say you're doing interviews, right? You're choosing what interview questions to ask, and in fact, you're probably even choosing which of the different qualitative traditions to use, right? Whether it's interpretive or, right? So in that context, you're making choices by the methods you choose that imply that you've got some idea about the theory, right? About what is important to ask, what is not important enough to ask, and then looking forward to how you analyze that data, you've got some theoretical sense of sort of the what is truth, right? What is evidence in the context of the work that you're doing. But qualitative research can also be entirely theory generating, right? Where you're you're doing like a phenomenographical study, right? You're trying to generate some theory that explains an outcome space where there might not be any theory, right? So right, so in that case, you might end up in your analysis, you might end up attaching to different pieces of theory, So, for example, a phenomenographic analysis could end up having a component of that analysis that ends up being motivational, but that's only one piece of a larger system. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh, I
Janavi, I'm
see.
not sure.
So
ahead.
Yashin is asking if when you ask a question, if you can say what university you're from.
I am actually Clemson, Engineering and Science Education Department.
Okay, Janavi, I'm not sure if there's any other questions that you may have. Otherwise, we could
No.
hand over.
No, that's it.
Okay.
Questions.
So Dr. Ohland, maybe what we'll do is at this point, I'm going to hand over back to the chair of the division. If he can make some concluding remarks, and then we will conclude with the session. Daniel, over to you.
Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, it's been a pleasure to have Dr. Ohland join us in facilitating this session. We want to sincerely appreciate you for your time, and to all the participants, our audience. We also want to thank you for creating time to attend this session. We hope in one way or the other, you've gained some valuable knowledge. And most importantly, this session is being recorded, and we're going to make it available to the student community of the ASEE Student Division and every other person that have attended. Should you want to, you can share your details, like email address, with the moderators. Be rest assured that it's safe. And at this junction, if there is no further question, I will hand over to the moderators. But before then, I also want you to know that there will be subsequent virtual series, which we're going to be having. Most importantly, in 2024, for January and February, you should look out on our website or social media platforms. Follow us there, where we're going to share details about upcoming events. Just for you to know, the most important one that is coming up in January is going to be Career Pathway. We're going to be, it's going to be in a form of panel discussion among the EER Engineering Education Research alumni. We're going to be hearing from them based on their career pathway and where respectively they are all working at the moment. I'm sure it's something you will find very useful. So we look forward to seeing you again in our next virtual series. At this point, I want to say thank you very much, Dr. Ohland, and thank you to all the student division executives who have made this possible. And thank you to all our wonderful audience. Over to you, the moderators.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you so much, Dr. Ohland. I see
Dr. Ohland, if we have time for one final question, I think Zicheng has a question.
Okay, let's.
Actually, Zicheng was actually responding to Needy's question.
Oh, all right.
But if you want to respond to that, Dr. Ohland, you can go ahead.
No, so yeah, so that's not really a space that I've spent a lot of time in. So I like Zicheng's answer. Basically, Zicheng is sort of clarifying that grounded theory doesn't need to be completely atheoretical. The importance of grounded theory is that you're really trying to develop new theory without really committing to any particular set of assumptions. So.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Janavi, for some odd reason, I cannot spotlight you. I don't know why. It'd be great if people can see you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Joel. It was very informative.
Thank you so much for managing all the chat and the technical matters behind the scenes and the student division. We will be having these series continuing throughout the year. Welcome, Janavi. You must have had some trick up your sleeve.
I did it.
All right, perfect. So with that, if you have any other concluding remarks, Janavi, and then we'll close the session.
I just wanted to thank Dr. Ohland for his time and all his patience to answer questions and taking the time to meet with us, and all the attendees. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. With that, we officially close the session. Thank you all.
All right.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can we stop the recording?